What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Hail Yes, back and better than ever. It is Wednesday afternoon, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. Shout out to my grandfather, my late grandfather, Pearl Harbor survivor at 17 years old. Maybe someday I'll tell the story of what he was doing at 17 compared to what I'm now doing at 30. But until then, I'm Tony Garcia, the Michigan beat writer for the Free Press. I'm joined by Nick Saban, our Big Ten insider. Reiner, regular season in the books, Big Ten title game in the books. For the second straight season, Michigan makes it through all of that unblemished. For the third straight season, back to the college football playoff. And of course, that's what we're here to talk about. All things Michigan and Alabama, the Rose Bowl. But I will bring you in with the question, Reiner, was this the right matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting debate. I think that the committee probably got it right. I mean, if you look at the Vegas line, it seems almost close to a pick-em with Michigan and Alabama. And I mean, if that's, the indicator to me that, that the committee got it right in the sense that, I mean, they wanted the most competitive matchup. Plus you've got two name brand programs, SEC versus Big Ten. The SEC champion, it would have been hard to leave out considering they dominated the college football playoff. And again, I think they wanted, to ensure that this was not going to be a blowout type of game. And that was a possibility with Florida not having their quarterback, Jordan Travis, there. I mean, it just, as much as Florida State has an argument, obviously going undefeated and winning a Power 5 conference championship, it still is a team that doesn't look as strong as it did at the beginning of the season, whereas Alabama looks like they've gotten stronger as the season has gone on.
I hear all those arguments, and this really was sort of, as we were talking, this was sort of Monday's conversation, but man, it's still very interesting. And all those points are very hard to disagree with. Yet I'm going to do it anyway. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not what people want. I know technically they might not be the stronger team, but they are the team that earned it, them being Florida State, in my mind. It's not their fault that LSU lost a couple games, right? Like and Florida was 5-7, right? They beat two SEC teams. They ran the table in the ACC. That's not on, and it's just two. And like if Alabama's loss had not been to Texas, right? It was any other equivalent top team. Bama would have been in, and Florida State would have been in, and Texas would have been left out. But because Texas had that direct win to Bama, you couldn't leave Texas out. And then Bama wins the SEC, couldn't leave them out. I think that's it was just the ultimate storm, which we've all hashed a million times. But I still feel for Florida State, it's just brutal. It's just brutal. But such is life. And with that, I don't feel too bad because we get to go to the Rose Bowl, we being us, and cover it. And all the people who listen to this podcast get to watch it. So with that, I think our top question today, Reiner, there are so many of them. What is your top Rose Bowl storyline? Is it just that, or could we start with the fact that in the final year of what has any semblance of how you and I grew up knowing college football, right? Before massive expansion, Michigan is in that final last Rose Bowl, the game that is synonymous with them as a program, what has always been their goal since the beginning of time.
Well, I predate you by a lot, Tony, because my memories of college football are far different than what it even looks like now. So, I mean,
well, yes. No.
I remember split national championships, like what Michigan had in 1997, where they're playing one game, that really has no. Yes, against Washington State in the Rose Bowl, and Nebraska's playing. I can't remember who in the probably in the Orange Bowl, and so yes, I mean it's a totally different way of looking at it. But yes, this is the last year, and it really seemed like an inevitability that Michigan was going to get to this point. I mean, we've been talking about the Rose Bowl since before the season, and that this was probably their destination. This is their best team that of the playoff era of Jim Harbaugh's tenure. it was set up for Michigan to get to this point. Now, the matchup itself is very intriguing, obviously, with Alabama. This is kind of the boogeyman, the kind of, I know they had the beat Georgia drill, but really Alabama's the progenitor of Georgia. It was basically the inspiration for Georgia. Everything that Georgia is what Alabama was. And a lot of questions were, did Alabama pass the torch to Georgia unwillingly? And now it seems like Alabama's wrested that torch back. I mean, obviously beating Georgia in the SEC championship game. So, I mean, this is kind of the matchup that really, in some ways, that Harbaugh and Michigan was anticipating, even though it was Georgia. But Alabama is basically the inspiration for what Georgia ultimately became. And so it's not going to be any different, really. This is what they were anticipating, what we were really anticipating before the season started.
We were, but it's a funny sort of twist that all year, and even still, not just Michigan has been preparing for Georgia, but whoever Georgia is, Alabama, just that top SEC team, that top team from another region that Michigan has not, the hump that Michigan has still not gotten over yet, right? That's been Michigan's goal all year. Yet, when the bracket comes out, the 1 seed is next to Michigan's name, right? The 4 seed is next to Alabama. And look at Vegas. Technically, Michigan is the favorite in this game. And so I think as much of this battle is going to be Michigan not getting caught up in the Alabama mystique. And as far as I know, you asked Blake Corum about that specifically right after we found out about the matchup. And yeah, I thought his reaction was really funny. He's like, act like we're the top dog. He's like, we are the top dog. Like, what do you mean? Right? Like he's like, of course, that's how I'm going to act.
Well,
but
I don't
know if everybody has that Blake Corum thought. And maybe a little bit of that sort of, I know you think a little bit of that leaks through with that reaction when Alabama is found out. But I guess, but before you get to that, it's just funny that all year, like Michigan still feels it needs to prove itself against this team as the favorite. It's just normally that's not the way that happens.
That's kind of what I was asking, because them to recognize that they are the number 1 team, but the reaction was pretty telling, right? When the matchup was announced, it was like, ooh, and they kind of gasped, and it was just like, the reality had set in that they're going to have to do this. And it's a real question with Michigan. I mean, they've lost the last 6 bowl games. Harbaugh's 1-6 in bowl games at Michigan, whereas Saban is 6-1 in his in the last 7 playoff semifinals. The only 7 playoff semifinals, but he's got 9 wins in the college football playoff. And Michigan has 0. They've lost 2, and they've lost to Georgia and TCU. The TCU game was not expected. The Georgia one was. But it just is a reminder of, even though Michigan is number 1 and Alabama is number 4, Alabama has a much better track record in this kind of playoff than Michigan does. So I think, for Alabama, and they've got somewhat of a psychological edge in this because they've done it. They've seen it done. Saban knows he can get it done. He knows how to get his team ramped up for this. I think he learned a lot in the 2014 semifinal loss to Ohio State. That was a question, and something I remember when I was covering Alabama that he talked about was, just trying to get his team prepared, not practicing too much. They practiced too much before that game, and he just understands the rhythm of how to get his team prepared for this. And I don't know if Michigan really does know how to get that. I mean, I do think, Harbaugh is a little bit more disorganized than Saban is. I mean, just talking to people who have worked around both guys. I mean, Saban is very, very organized. Harbaugh's not. And when you have a 3-week period where you also have the early signing period and the transfer portal to navigate and getting your team ready, organization is key to being successful during this period.
It is. And those are all things, relevant points that we're going to get into. But I guess Saban is more meticulous than everyone on earth, right? So that is a hard, but I mean, I don't know. I have not been around, and I'm not saying you use the word disorganized, but Harbaugh is also pretty rather. I mean, what coaches say is he's empowering, right? So maybe there's times that looks like he's not on top of all things at all times, but they sort of look at it as building everyone up. And you're right. Michigan has not proven that it knows how to handle this layoff, right? It got pounded by Georgia when it was not ready for that moment. But really
I honestly don't think that they were mentally even. They were just happy to be there.
They were, and then they've said as much. But last year, there's something in the prep, right? However, now you've done it a couple times, and I think we had this conversation off air. It's sort of it becomes sort of like Ohio State, right? Like you're just going to always assume Ohio State's going to win. Like going into 21, it had been a decade, right? Like there had been nothing to prove that Michigan can do it. Eventually, you do it, right? Eventually, you are just, and it doesn't just happen, but you have to do things differently. And Michigan's off this week. They're not practicing, and they too are trying to have that give and take and not overreact, but appropriately react to their shortcomings from last year. And one more note. I just wanted to, before we move on, and I want to give you a chance to respond as well. I know you were talking about Vegas earlier, and we were talking about like the proper matchups. I mean, Michigan is and I said earlier, they're still a 1-point favorite. Like they opened as a 2-point favorite. I think 90% of the early money that came in was on Alabama, right? I mean, just hammering Alabama. It never crossed over to money line or even. Michigan is still a favorite, and that might be a little too technical, but there are a lot of external factors showing this is not just, Michigan that can never win a bowl game. Alabama, who is big bad Alabama, and this is a foregone conclusion, like when the two teams met on January 1, 2020, and Bama won 35-16, and Saban scores the late touch and all of that. I don't think. And now Bama might win, but this is a different feel.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't think that this is an elite Alabama, which is why I think this has been Saban's best coaching job. I mean, I've been saying this, I think, since week 3. Since I thought Alabama was
week 3. Actually, week 3, we were saying Saban had lost.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so I'm like, he's gonna, if they're going to do anything, it's going to take, a lot of heavy lifting, and he's done it. And then ever since then, I think I was talking to friends who still work in Alabama, and I was like, by I think like week 10, I was like saying this is by far Saban's best coaching job that he's done, because I don't know how he's doing it. It doesn't look like a vintage Alabama team. They don't have necessarily the best players at every position, even though I guess they still have a roster that's ranked number 1 according to 24/7 Sports, I guess, in the talent composite. But this is not the same Alabama team that even Michigan played in 2019, which didn't even make the college football playoff. That had, Tua Tagovailoa, they had Jerry Jeudy, Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith. I mean, those guys were still on the team back then, and again, made Alabama look almost indomitable. I mean, this Alabama team is not. I mean, they barely squeaked by Auburn, and Auburn lost to New Mexico State, the week before, and so it's like it's not the same Alabama team. However, I do have questions about how Michigan matches up, particularly on the offensive line against Alabama's front. And also, what the Jalen Milroe will do against, Michigan's defense. I mean, they have not seen a quarterback, a dual threat caliber with that kind of athleticism all year.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, nothing near it, right? But to your point, going through that Alabama roster is an exercise in just like, oh my goodness, like Patrick Surtain was on that team. Yeah. Trevon Diggs was on that team. Henry Ruggs, who people forget about for obvious reasons, was on that team. Xavier McKinney, Will Reichard, who is now a senior, the leading kicker, the leading scorer in Alabama history. He was a freshman on that team, and I'm only on the roster to number 19, right? Najee Harris, number 22, Brian Robinson Jr., Jerome Ford. All of these guys. Jerome Ford is the right.
to Cincinnati.
He's running back to the Browns.
Yeah, right.
And that, I mean, just the names on this.
I mean, that's what Alabama looked like all 3 years when I covered them. I mean, like the entire 2016 defense got drafted. They were dominant, and they had guys. They had the talent advantage over everybody, but then you also had the fact that they were extremely well coached, and then it made them look like they were indestructible. Of course, they lost that 2016 year on the final play against Clemson, but the point still stands. I mean, those Alabama teams were incredibly loaded. This one, not as much. I mean, they've got issues on the offensive line. They've had some issues even with someone of the front seven. I mean, they've got a couple guys, but they don't have the dual pass rushers. They've got Dallas Turner, but they don't have like a guy that quite balances them out, although Chris Braswell has come along in his 5th year. I mean, that's a guy that was still there when I was there,
Blake Corum's high school teammate.
Yeah, right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, it's a much different team than those teams, I feel.
No, you would know best, right? I mean, you're the one who's been there and can understand. And so I didn't want to get into Harbaugh and Saban, but there's going to be tons of time to do that and juxtapose them both against one another, because I think you just led into something that is, as you hear my dog coughing, you're talking about those Alabama teams that had all that depth and all that NFL talent. I mean, we could look back at this Michigan team and look at 15, 20, some odd NFL draft picks as well. And mind you, I would argue the 3 most raw, talented players who I would want as an NFL GM, none of them or maybe 4, none of them are eligible, right? Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, all sophomores. Yeah. And I think those might be Michigan's highest end, like NFL guys. But there are still, Michigan's top 7 offensive linemen, all seniors or grad students, 2 wide receivers, a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 to 4 defensive backs, a linebacker, a defensive tackle, 2 to 3 edges, a kicker. I mean, Michigan might set an NFL record for draft picks this year as well. So the difference is it's not like first round skill position guys, right? It's just a lot of solid, good depth.
Yeah, and I mean, again, back in 2020, Michigan, when they played Alabama that year, I mean, Michigan did not have the same level of depth that Alabama did. It wasn't even close. I mean, they also didn't have the guys that looked like Alabama's guys. I mean, Carlo Kemp was playing defensive tackle. I mean, he's like an NFL linebacker, or a linebacker in the pros, I should say. And so, or at the pro level, and it's just the size of the guys. There was an NFL scout that came and he was very familiar with both programs, Alabama and Michigan. I was talking to him, and he said that, again, the Michigan players back in 2019, 2020 did not look like Alabama's players. And so Harbaugh's done a really good job with that. I think, again, them switching the defensive scheme to the current defensive scheme allowed them to find a profile of player that more fits and matches up better with teams like Alabama and Georgia. And this is only beneficial for Michigan in this kind of game. I mean, them making that defensive switch in 2021, huge for Michigan to be able to compete in the playoff.
It obviously did everything. I mean, it literally changed the entire program, because they could beat up on everyone, and then Don Brown, the man defense, and Dr. Blitz would just get beat on crossers.
Also, having guys like playing that pseudo safety linebacker viper position doesn't translate in the NFL as much. I mean, Michael Barrett luckily was able to make the transition to the current linebacker position, but again, he would have been a fish out of water. When it comes to NFL evaluators, and who knows, he might have, dropped weight to kind of continue to play that position. And, it wouldn't necessarily have been as viable of an NFL draft prospect as he probably is now.
Yeah. My other rhetorical question for this exercise is why, and I think the answer, well, there's a couple answers, why everybody does not run this Baltimore Ravens style defense, this multiple defense, is kind of beyond me. I mean, I think the simple answer is it's pretty complex, right? There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of understanding that needs to happen. And there are different moving parts, right? 5 down linemen, 4 down linemen, a nickel, and different aspects of it. But
I think
it's so much better than a basic 4-3. Like, there are so many things you can do. You can, like, Michigan, like against Iowa, for example, right? Michigan's base packet, or I mean, I guess not their base package, but more often than not, the first time on the field, they come out in nickel. They have 5 DBs. Not against Iowa. They had 5 defensive linemen on the field, and they had everyone close to the line of scrimmage, and there's nothing you can do.
Well, I mean, again, Georgia and Alabama, I mean, some of the more sophisticated and better run programs in the country do run this kind of multiple front defenses.
I'm saying even Michigan, who was winning 10 games a year,
right,
and has all the resource, like, it took a while, like,
I know. Well, I mean, it took them finally moving on from Don Brown and bringing in this kind of defense to get the program to the point where, again, they're competing in the playoff and have a chance to beat in Alabama and Georgia. Whereas, again, a few years ago, that would have been a pipe dream. And so Michigan has made a huge strides, and it has a lot to do with, again, changing the defense. I mean, Chris Partridge even alluded to it. I mean, like, him coming back, I mean, he's not here anymore, obviously, after the whole Connor Stallion situation. But when it came back, it looked different to him. Like, they looked more like they were able to match up with those kind of SEC teams. And so, I think this has been a huge benefit for them. And, we'll see how it translates, but I think they're in much better position to go up against Alabama than they were, again, in 2019, 2020.
I agree. And we'll take a quick break. On the other side, we will continue this conversation and sort of expand it on what is a very busy time for the program. So we'll be right back. This is Hell Yes. All right, Reiner, just sort of picking up where we left off. It's not just, a lot of teams are either prepping for a bowl and just a lower level bowl and trying to fill out their the rest of their roster for next year via the high school and the transfer portal. Michigan also, all those things going on, but it's different when you are still, like, most teams are not still fully focused on this year, right? You're getting extra reps, you're practicing, you're like, different guys are getting different looks. You're turning things over for the next year. Michigan cannot do that, right? They are in fully right now mode, while at the same time knowing as we just mentioned, they're going to lose 15, 16, 17 guys probably to the draft. Not to mention, right now, Michigan is one of, I think, 2 teams in the country that does not have anybody who has left in the transfer portal. Even last year, when Michigan had the same type of success, there were guys who entered the portal, right? Things can be all good. You can have great connections, but you just want something different, right? So that will happen. But December 4th, the portal opened. It's open until January 4th. I mean, it's just a lot going on right now for Michigan coaches who are flying all over the country to try and handle.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely busy time. I was just talking to Todd Berry with the American Football Coaches Association. He was just talking about how coaches feel, like it's almost an impossible task to be, having to deal with all of this all at once. But there really was no perfect solution here. I mean, there have been talks about moving the early signing date up to August, but they worry about, if they do that, then the high school players would opt out their senior seasons, if they sign then. And then, also there's been talks about moving it to late November, which seems like a sweet spot. But that's going to obviously have some impact, because then you're going to want to have coaching changes perhaps earlier than that period. So so right up until that period. I mean, it could be. So there's really no perfect period. And then you have this added component of the portals windows. The coaches didn't want to have all year round players entering the portal, so they created these windows. And the reason why you have the window in December is because you have to get the players in so that they can enroll. And you're starting to also see universities move their start date of their second semester back a week because of one, eligibility issues with the championship game. If your semester starts before the championship game, there's a possibility a lot of your players could be ineligible because they didn't go to class while preparing for the draft, because they didn't really care about this fall semester. But then, you have that component. And then you have also the fact that players could be trying to get into their next, university by, X date, to be enrolled. And so you could have players having to leave championship teams. And that's a fear going into next year with the 12-team playoff, what's going to happen there? Because, again, players might be on the trying to get to their next school, and they could leave the team in the middle of the playoff. And so, there's a lot. This whole period is a mess, and it's indicative of what college football is right now. It's just a big mess, It
is. It's a total mess. I guess my hope is that the 12-team playoff, by more teams getting in, right? You don't have to be leaving, right? Like right. You won't have Kyle McCord transfer. I mean, and Dylan Gabriel and these guys, you know what I mean? It's just like, why is Kyle? I mean, I guess Ohio State probably did not make. They did not make. If you watch that Ryan Day interview, woof. I mean, they didn't make the commitment to him. Yeah, right. But I mean, for fear of sounding like a coach I used to cover early in my career, Tom Izzo, I don't know what happened to just kind of sticking it out and stick like ever. You know what I mean? I'm all for transferring and money and paying the players and not these dirty, slimy execs. Good, but this is not where we are now. Is not good. And obviously with NIL, NIL was not supposed to be a group of boosters with a bag of cash saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. It was supposed to be, we aren't telling just because you're an amateur, you can't go be on a big boy commercial, right? That's what it was supposed to be. And the portal and everyone moving and bouncing left to right and no loyalty and anything like that is all just, they're all just symptoms of the greater problem that is where college football is at. And yes, you are older than me, like you mentioned earlier, Reiner. But even I remember pre-college football playoff.
I mean, Saban was one of the first people to say that the playoff is going to make the bowl games meaningless, and so he was like the first one to say it. And he was like,
"The Rose Bowl will mean nothing."
Yeah, he said, "Just watch this," and then he was right on the money about it. And he usually has a good read on things that can anticipate stuff, and that's why he's won as much as he has, because he understands these global issues, and he also is able to adapt to them. I mean, that's again, he was kind of caught off guard, I think, with the early signing period the first year Saban was, and then he adjusted and was able to kind of find his sweet spot, and again, trying to navigate that. But it's a huge issue for all the coaches, especially in the playoff. I mean, there's a reason why Harbaugh said, we're giving the players a week off. It wasn't just because, he was being so nice. I mean, they had to take a week off so that they could go
to Idaho.
Go to Idaho and go to Austin to see Blake Frazier and go try to get Gatlin Bair, who just decommitted from Boise State. I mean, part of it is because the coaches have to get out of town and go all across the country to kind of finish off the recruiting class. Meanwhile, they're trying to prepare for their biggest game of the year.
Yeah, and you have the most interesting. I mean, our final point is that I don't know if there is, and of course we have our eyes on Michigan, right? We're in the Michigan lane, and so we don't know exactly the inner workings and all the dynamics of every program. What I'm inclined to believe is no other program in America is still at a bigger crossroads, right? It feels like they are climbing this mountain, like Mount Everest, and they can see the summit. They can see the celebration and everyone waiting. I don't know who's at the summit already, but this metaphorical people waiting right there. But if they put their axe in the wrong spot, like this avalanche could come down and they could not reach it. And whereas so many other teams are, and that's because of the uncertainty of the future of Harbaugh as he's doing all these recruiting trips, right? And today there's reports surfacing that he and Michigan are moving closer towards a contract. Now, I mean, what we will say, or I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, Reiner, but I'm not ready to say that that's a done deal just yet.
No, I don't think anybody would say it's a done deal. I mean, again, we've seen Harbaugh look for NFL jobs each of the last 2 cycles. And I was talking to somebody who's close to him, before, and that person said that, that Harbaugh would probably look to go back, look to the NFL, realizing that Michigan's going to lose a lot of talent. Again, Michigan and Harbaugh's stock may never be higher than it is now. And then, that he would have to, go through a possible transition period if he stayed. And so the time to strike was now. And there's, Adam Schefter, I think, said that there might be 10 or 11 openings. You figure Harbaugh would probably have a good chance at getting one of them. This is probably the highest percentage that he'd have, even going back the last couple of years when he interviewed in person with the Vikings in 2022. And even when the Broncos, flew to talk to him last year. And so I think this might be the best opportunity for Harbaugh to go. And, again, with the looming NCAA sanctions possibly hanging over his head, that at least that prospect of it, with the original NCAA investigation into impermissible recruiting and coaching activities, and now you've got the sign stealing investigation too. Yeah, it remains to be seen whether Harbaugh, would want to even exist, and try to fight through that period. When also, again, his whole roster could be completely transformed.
That's why we're talking about it, right? You got the roster that's going into a big overhaul. You have a couple of potential NCAA investigations that the 2 that you just mentioned. You have his desire that he has expressed previously, not right now, to coach in the NFL, and that's all the. And we don't know. I mean, those NCAA investigations, you don't know how he could be punished next year, and you're going into a much harder Big Ten, right? So those are all the reasons that Harbaugh might go. But then he is 2 wins away, and Michigan, with 4 teams left, is the odds-on favorite to win the national championship. They've beaten Ohio State 3 times in a row. They've walked to 3 straight Big Ten championships. He's done. I mean, that's everything you dream of. It's more like you couldn't even fathom this if you're Michigan, and you're that close. So lock it in and keep this thing going, right? And it's so amazing that even right now, like it's my job and part of our job to know which way this is going. What I've been told by people around it is anyone who's saying they know what's going to happen is not. They might think they do. They don't. Only Jim knows. Only Jim knows. Maybe his wife. Maybe Sarah. That's it. And even he doesn't know yet. He just knows what he wants. It depends if the NFL wants him. No, he was 44-19-1 and has not got. And you've said it before. All the retread coaches keep coming through, yet he hasn't gotten that offer extended. And this is not a slight on him. Like I think he's a tremendous coach. I think he should. I think someone should give him a shot in the NFL, and I think Michigan should want to keep him to a certain extent. However, Sharon did pretty well. And there's a time where what's worth it, right? However, I know this is working if I'm Michigan, right? And I am gonna, if I ride it too long and it breaks, then I ride it too long and it breaks.
Well, it's working to a point. Of course, there's going to be, possibly a reckoning, in the future. I don't know when, depending on what happens with, again, the NCAA cloud hanging over the program. And then it's, again, Michigan should just enjoy.
Michigan has clearly made its peace with that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Michigan brass has seemed to, from my understanding, the regents, the AD, the president, not just from my understanding publicly, they've all backed Harbaugh. So I'm just saying it with the understanding, like, yes, if new things come to light and it gets further, and I'm not saying that Michigan is absolved of punishment that I think is deserved and is coming, but you've gone this far, right? Like, you've already served these suspensions. It's just hard, like, that's
but I mean, that there's not going to be, future discipline, and then there's also, I mean, who knows what the NCAA, could do in that situation, and again, will the university, catch collateral damage for, trying to keep, Jim if he's there. But I mean, it's also, again, it's a question of whether Jim has the opportunity to go. I mean, obviously he hasn't had that opportunity presented to him. I mean, he's got a reputation for being difficult to work with. I mean, I think you've seen it here at Michigan. Him and Ward Manuel have not always been on the same page, and often have not. And there seems to be some friction there. And so that's kind of been par for the course wherever he has been. It was at Stanford with Bowlesby. It was, with Trent Baalke in the 49ers. It's been the case with Ward. So, I mean, it's kind of buyer beware with the NFL. I mean, the guy wins a lot, and he's won a lot these last 3 years at Michigan. And so Michigan has tolerated it, but they were even close to pulling the cord and ducking out in 2020.
But that was just a wins and losses thing, right? Like, we see.
But it's
at a certain rate that it's.
Part of the reason why that happened was because Harbaugh went and signed a contract extension. He had less than 2 years left on his deal. It was the most unorthodox thing that you've seen in the coaching industry. I mean, nobody has a contract extension or a contract that runs to that close to the final deadline, to the end point, and without having an extension in the works. And so it got to the point where, Ward Manuel, like, they had to get a contract done or get rid of him, and they chose to get this contract, which included a massive pay cut, which kind of kickstarted this whole Harbaugh to the NFL thing. Because before that, I mean, Harbaugh was really annoyed by all the rumors and speculation about him going to the NFL, but then he kind of just leaned into it when he interviewed with the Vikings. Turns out right after that, he got the pay bump back to basically his pay restored. But then he went and did it again when he said he wouldn't interview with the Vikings. So again, there's that uncertainty, and there's always going to be that uncertainty, with Jim Harbaugh and the NFL, because he's, stated on record that, nothing would be better than winning the Super Bowl. So, I mean, he was as close as you could come to winning. I mean, what it was 8 yards away, basically, against his brother in 2012. So, there's going to always be questions about it, and there's certainly going to be questions about it this year with all that's hanging over the program. But that's why Michigan fans should just enjoy the moment, almost block out the future, because we don't know what's going to happen.
And that's why we talked about this, right? Like, we're talking about it's already a busy time for a program normally, right? It's like you're talking to this guy, like you're talking to your guys, and they're saying, like, college coaches are already swimming. Then you add a college football playoff in the mix, and then you're really going. Then you add some NCAA investigations in the mix, and the uncertainty of next year and your coach and a contract. I mean, how Michigan has been able to just laser focus this thing. I mean, it's testament to everyone in that building, from the top to the bottom. Is there anything else we need to touch on? I mean, Michigan basketball lost 5 of 6, obviously. I think that is more of a discussion for next week, because that's not something that can be glossed over. There have been some serious concerns with the basketball team, with the defense. I know that was kind of a hard pivot. But Ryan, I'm just thinking, as we put a bow on this, I'm just trying to think about what else is in store as part of this. Live in the moment, just sort of appreciate it, because there were a lot of things we wanted to get to that we couldn't get to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, again, the focus, I think, for most Michigan fans are on what's going to happen on January 1st, as it should be. I mean, it's Michigan's this is Michigan's best shot at a national title. We've been saying this since the podcast debuted and back in the summer, and it's just the truth. I mean, everything that we've thought has played out kind of as is up until this point. We'll see what happens. Except for obviously the sign stealing investigation coming out, and some of the suspensions that have been levied against Harbaugh. But in general, everything, the performance on the field has kind of met our expectations. I mean, I had them going undefeated through the regular season, and my full expectation was them getting back to the playoff and competing in the Rose Bowl, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, I was not quite as much of a savant as you, but that was mostly because I picked them to win the national championship, and only LSU or like LSU, Georgia. Like it's been, I don't know if a Big Ten team, well, certainly in this era has run the whole table, and Michigan has certainly not done that. So I just didn't see Michigan going 15-0. But so I threw them a loss at Penn State. But thought they would still make their way in. So they're right where you said they would be, and they still have the path to where I said they may end up. So they've done their job, and we're trying to do ours. So until next time, when we will hope to get into perhaps some more of these names. I have a piece up on freak.com about some of those names in the transfer portal to watch. Obviously, we could talk all day about. We didn't even get into if J.J. McCarthy's coming back and Dante Moore and where to go with quarterback pieces. There's time. Michigan's taking the week off. We have been trying to do the same, and I got a flight to catch for this weekend. So, we're gonna get to it. So thanks to Reiner, as always. Thanks to our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery-Nichols, executive editor, Anjanette Delgado, sports editor, Kirkland Crawford, audio engineer, Robin Chan, and sports editor and our show's producer, Andrew Burkle. I'm Tony Garcia. This is Hail Yes. Talk to you next time.